What if the reason you feel behind at 45 is not because your life is over? What if it is because you can no longer tolerate living a life that was never truly yours? That is the brutal truth. The pain you feel is not always the pain of failure. Sometimes it is the pain of waking up after years of obedience, years of compromise, years of becoming what was expected, and realizing that what you built does not fit the man you have become. That is why this moment feels so heavy. It is not just regret, it is recognition. It is the sickening realization that you may have given your best strength to the wrong things, and the terrifying awareness that time will not pause while you decide what to do next. But here is the truth most men never hear. Feeling behind at 45 is not always proof that you missed your life. Sometimes it is the first proof that you are finally conscious enough to reclaim it. You look over the years behind you and see the evidence everywhere. Half-finished ambitions, doors you never walked through, decisions you made for security that slowly became a sentence. You remember the younger version of yourself who believed that by this age, something solid would have been built, something undeniable, some proof that your effort had led somewhere that mattered. But now you stand in the middle of your own life and feel a private fear you rarely say out loud. Maybe I gave my best years to the wrong things. The energy you once spent without thinking now feels rationed. The confidence you assumed would deepen with age has in some places thinned instead. There are mornings when you wake not with hunger but with heaviness, not because you are lazy, not because you lack ability, but because some deeper part of you has begun to resist the life you built in ignorance. That is the part no one prepared you for. No one told you that there would come a season when achievement itself could feel unbearable if it were built on a false foundation. No one told you that a man can do nearly everything he was taught to do and still arrive at the middle of life with the sickening suspicion that he has betrayed his own nature. No one told you that exhaustion is sometimes not the result of too much work. Sometimes it is the result of too much misalignment. So you begin to wonder if it is over. You begin to wonder if the years ahead are nothing more than maintenance, endurance, quiet disappointment dressed up as adulthood. You began to fear that the great opportunities belong to younger men now, that reinvention belongs to the bold, the gifted, the lucky, the unburdened, that you, after spending so many years becoming what was expected, have become too late to become what is true. But this is not the end of your life. It is the end of your unconscious life. This is not a collapse. It is a revelation. This is not proof that you are behind. It is proof that you can no longer be satisfied with illusion. And that is why this painful, humiliating, deeply personal moment may become the turning point that divides the first half of your life from the second. For the first half was the season in which you learned, obeyed, adapted, endured, and paid for your wisdom. The second can become the season in which you finally live by it. This is not an ending, it is an awakening. And if you understand it correctly, being 45 and feeling behind may prove to be one of the greatest advantages you have ever possessed. We must name this condition correctly. A man can endure much if he understands the nature of the thing he is fighting. But when pain remains unnamed, it becomes fog. It surrounds him, weakens him, persuades him that something is wrong with him, when in truth he is simply divided. What is this feeling you carry? It is not merely sadness. It is not merely jealousy. It is not merely fatigue. It is the pain of misused years becoming visible. It is the pain of seeing, perhaps for the first time with real clarity, the distance between the life you are living and the life you were meant to live. You feel it in ordinary moments. When someone else announces a victory and instead of feeling inspired, you feel pierced. When you see another man building what he believes in and something inside you tightens. When you sit alone at night and your mind wanders back through old decisions with the terrible question, when did I begin disappearing from my own life? That is the wound. You are not simply reacting to another man's success. You are reacting to what it stirs inside you. It reminds you of unlived possibilities, roads abandoned, a standard you once held for yourself and then slowly negotiated downward in the name of realism, security, responsibility, and time. And perhaps the cruelest part is this: your life may not even look like failure from the outside. You may have a respectable career. You may have honored your responsibilities. You may have built a life that others would call stable. But a man can possess order without peace. He can possess income without meaning. He can possess status without identity. He can possess a role without possessing himself. That is why the pain is so difficult to explain, because there may be no obvious catastrophe to point to, no public disgrace, no dramatic collapse, only a growing internal resistance to continuing as you have continued. You go to work, but something in you stays behind. You hold conversations, but a part of you remains absent. You meet your obligations, but without the inner consent that once gave those obligations dignity. This is what it means for the soul to grow discontent. There is another part of this suffering, and it is one of the most destructive: the invisible timeline. By 45, you believe certain things should have been settled. Perhaps not perfectly, but enough to let you stand on firmer ground. You believe that by this age your finances would be stronger, your confidence deeper, your life less improvised. You believe the questions of identity would be behind you, not staring back at you in the mirror each morning. Instead, you may feel uncertainty where you expected mastery, regret where you expected gratitude, pressure where you expected arrival. This is why being 45 and feeling behind carries such a sharp sting, because it is not merely disappointment about the present. It is disappointment measured against a deadline. It feels as if the clock itself has issued a verdict. But life does not speak that way. Fear speaks that way. Comparison speaks that way. Humiliation speaks that way. The deeper truth is that much of your pain comes from trying to live by a schedule that was never designed for a real life. Some men appear to arrive early and spend the next 20 years protecting an identity they never questioned. Others seem lost for decades and then, because suffering finally forces honesty upon them, begin to build with a power they did not possess in youth. There are men who inherit direction, and there are men who earn it. The second path is harder, but it often produces the stronger man. You must also understand that the body joins this crisis. A divided life does not remain abstract. It enters the nervous system. It enters the face. It enters the voice. It becomes fatigue, irritability, cynicism, disconnection, a private rage that leaks into ordinary moments. You become sharp with those you love, not because they caused the wound, but because your unlived life has become unbearable to carry in silence. You may even begin to suspect there is something wrong with you. There is not. There is something wrong with the arrangement. There is something wrong with living too long in violation of what you know. There is something wrong with spending the prime of your strength climbing a ladder without first examining the wall against which it rests. And if you have reached the point where the old arrangement no longer holds, then you are not broken. You are becoming conscious. That ache in you is not always a sign that life is ending. Sometimes it is the sign that false life is ending. That is why this pain, though bitter, must not be wasted. If understood properly, it becomes not your sentence, but your summons. Consider the man who obeyed, not the man who rebelled early, not the man who ignored expectation and chased conviction while others called him foolish. No, consider the man who obeyed, the man who did what sensible people do, the man who listened, adjusted, matured, and accepted the bargain placed before him. He learned early that life favored the reliable, so he became reliable. He learned that security mattered more than longing, so he chose security. He learned that the world respected the man who could endure what he did not love, so he endured. He found work not by definite purpose, but by momentum. One opportunity became another. One compromise was justified by necessity, then repeated by habit, then defended by identity. Before long, he could no longer tell the difference between what he had chosen and what had simply happened to him. From the outside, he looked disciplined. From the inside, he was disappearing. He became good at what he never loved, and that is one of the most dangerous positions a man can occupy, because competence can imprison him more efficiently than failure ever could. If he had failed early, he might have changed. If he had collapsed publicly, he might have been forced into truth. But because he succeeded just enough, he was rewarded for remaining divided. Years passed. He rose in responsibility. He acquired the symbols. He learned the language. He played the role so thoroughly that even he began to mistake performance for identity. But the soul does not surrender forever. At first, it protests softly, a little dread on Sunday evening, a strange hollowness after achievements that once would have thrilled him, a growing impatience with conversations centered on things he no longer believes matter, a weariness that sleep does not cure. Then the protest deepens. He begins to feel envy, not of another man's possessions, but of another man's conviction. He sees someone building with belief and feels something twist within him. He begins to realize that what he thought was maturity may have been surrender, that what he called responsibility may have been fear, that what he called realism may have been the long burial of desire. Then comes the moment of exposure. It may not be dramatic. In fact, it often is not. Perhaps a project is destroyed overnight, and with it vanishes the illusion that his sacrifices guaranteed meaning. Perhaps he is passed over. Perhaps the company restructures. Perhaps the relationship he leaned on for identity fractures. Perhaps he simply wakes one morning and feels with unbearable clarity that if he lives this same day 10,000 more times, he will die having betrayed something essential. That is the moment the wrong race becomes visible. And once visible, it cannot be made invisible again. This is why so many men become frightened in midlife. Not because they have suddenly become weak, but because they are finally forced to confront the cost of continued dishonesty. They see that more effort cannot redeem the wrong direction. They see that more endurance cannot create meaning where none exists. They see that another decade of unconscious repetition would not stabilize them. It would erase them. That realization is terrifying. It feels like ruin. For a man who has built identity around the race itself cannot easily imagine life outside it. He says, "If I stop this, who will I be?" He says, "If I begin again, will I not lose everything?" He says, "At this age, can I still become anything other than what I already am?" But the question itself contains the answer. What you already are is not the title you hold. It is not the role you perform. It is not the costume that fit well enough to get you through your 30s. What you are is deeper than the race. And often the great work of midlife is not constructing a new self from nothing, but recovering the self that was buried beneath years of adaptation. That is why this moment, though humiliating, matters so much, because humiliation strips a man of borrowed pride. It shows him what can be lost. It shows him what cannot. It forces him to distinguish between the life he inherited and the life he would consciously choose. The man in the wrong race usually imagines that his problem is lateness. It is not. His problem is allegiance. He has been loyal to an arrangement that no longer deserves his loyalty. He has been faithful to an image that costs too much to maintain. He has been trying to extract life from a structure that is draining it from him. Until he sees this, he will remain trapped. Once he sees it, he will suffer, but it will be fruitful suffering, because the pain of seeing clearly is infinitely more valuable than the comfort of remaining numb. And so the great question emerges, not as theory, but as necessity. What is my definite purpose? Not what earns the quickest approval, not what protects the old image, not what lets me keep explaining my life without changing it. What is my definite purpose? That question, once sincerely asked, begins the second life. Before you can begin again, you must become ruthless with illusion. A man cannot build a new life while still worshiping the false ideas that deform the old one. He must tear them down, not politely, not in theory, in truth. The first illusion, that life is a straight line. You were taught to imagine life as orderly progression. Learn, work, advance, accumulate, arrive. That story gives men the illusion of predictability. It rewards them for staying in formation. But life is not linear. Life is conflict, correction, discovery, detour, collapse, reconstruction, and rise. A man may begin with confidence and lose it. He may begin without direction and earn it. He may appear ahead at 30 and be inwardly dead by 50. He may appear behind at 45 and yet be standing at the threshold of his first honest life. The straight line illusion is cruel because it causes you to interpret necessary struggle as abnormal failure. You do not merely suffer the detour, you condemn yourself for it. You do not merely stumble, you conclude that you have ruined the sequence. You do not merely evolve, you accuse yourself of lateness. But what if the detours made you? What if the humiliation stripped you of fantasies you could not have surrendered willingly? What if the years that now look wasted were the forge in which your discernment was hammered into shape? Many men arrive early because they never questioned what they were chasing. Many men arrive late because truth demanded a deeper education. Do not envy the man whose life made sense too soon. He may have been spared confusion, but he may also have been spared depth. The second illusion, that it is too late. This illusion has destroyed more futures than failure ever did. It whispers with the voice of certainty. You had your chance. You should have begun earlier. The world belongs to younger men now. It would be embarrassing to change. You are too old to start again. This is fear using time as a weapon. Look carefully at the deception. The same man who says he is too late to begin again will often resign himself to living 20 more years in conditions he already knows are wrong. He says it is too late to build, but not too late to decay. Too late to risk, but not too late to suffer. Too late to reinvent, but not too late to endure emptiness year after year. This is not reason. It is fear defending its territory. At 45, you are not empty-handed. You are not naive. You are not untested. You possess experience, pattern recognition, scar tissue, discernment, and a more exact knowledge of consequence than your younger self could possibly have possessed. If a man of 25 has speed, a man of 45 can have judgment, and judgment, rightly used, is often the greater power. You are not beginning from scratch. You are beginning from evidence. You know what drains you. You know what lies cost. You know what approval cannot do for you. You know what misalignment feels like in your body. You know how quickly time moves when it is surrendered to routine. That knowledge is not a disadvantage, it is capital. The third illusion, that external rewards can quiet an internal betrayal. You were taught to seek visible proof of success, title, income, property, recognition, useful things in their place, but dangerous masters. For a man may pursue them under the false belief that if he can only secure enough outer evidence, the inner fracture will disappear. It will not. No title can restore a self you abandoned. No salary can create meaning in work you inwardly despise. No applause can quiet the conscience of a man who knows he is living beneath his own conviction. This is why success, when disconnected from purpose, often becomes strangely unbearable. It removes excuses. A man can no longer say, "I will feel whole when I get there," because he has gotten there and discovered that there is no life in it. That discovery feels brutal, but it is mercy. False hope can imprison a man longer than hardship ever could. When you finally see that external trophies cannot redeem internal division, you are freed to ask a better question. Not how do I look successful, but what kind of life allows me to respect myself? Not what will impress the world, but what can I give my full consent to? Not how do I win their approval, but what can I build without betraying my own mind? This is the moment of demolition, and demolition is necessary when the structure being destroyed can no longer support life. Now we come to the great reversal. If all you do is diagnose the wound, you will become eloquent in suffering and remain unchanged. There must come a turn, a reordering, a moment in which you stop treating your age as an indictment and begin to see it as preparation. This is not a midlife crisis. It is a midlife awakening. A crisis is panic in search of distraction. An awakening is truth in search of expression. A crisis makes a man try to recover youth. An awakening makes him finally value wisdom. A crisis asks, how do I get back what time has taken? An awakening asks, what can I build now that illusion has been removed? At 45, if you have suffered honestly, you possess three powers that youth rarely commands: clarity, discipline, self-respect. 1. The power of clarity. In youth, possibility is wide, but identity is shallow. You can imagine many lies because you have not yet lived long enough to understand the cost of any of them. But by 45, if you have been paying attention, life has taught you what your soul accepts and what it rejects. You know the feeling of obligation without conviction. You know the feeling of achievement without meaning. You know the dullness that comes from saying yes too often to what is not yours. And because you know these things now, your choices can become cleaner. The world calls narrowed options a loss. Wisdom calls them focus. You do not need 1,000 possibilities. You need one honest direction. 2. The power of discipline. The discipline of youth is often theatrical. It burns hot, speaks loudly, and depends heavily on emotion. But the discipline forged through disappointment is of a different order. It is quieter, less visible, more durable. A man who has recovered from humiliation possesses a strength no motivational slogan can create. A man who has endured years of wrong direction and still retains the will to begin again is not fragile. He has weight. He understands that progress is rarely dramatic. He no longer expects transformation to feel glamorous. He can tolerate the slow building of a meaningful life because he has already experienced the emptiness of fast, hollow gains. That is power. 3. The power of self-respect. This may be the greatest advantage of all. In youth, you often want to be chosen, admired, approved, included. Your decisions are shaped by imagined audiences. You think in terms of appearance because you do not yet possess enough inner authority to stand alone. But if life has done its work properly, something begins to change in midlife. You become less willing to perform, less willing to beg for recognition, less willing to spend your life in exchange for acceptance. You begin to ask not merely, will they approve, but can I live with myself if I continue? That question is the beginning of self-respect. A man with self-respect cannot be easily bought. He cannot be easily flattered into obedience. He cannot be easily frightened back into a false life once he has seen its cost. This is why 45 can become such a decisive age, not because the world suddenly becomes easier, but because the man who has awakened becomes harder to deceive. He sees more. He tolerates less nonsense. He values his time more fiercely. He understands that the years ahead are too precious to be handed over to dead routines. This is not decline. This is concentration. This is not the loss of possibility. This is the end of waste. You are not standing at the edge of relevance. You are standing at the edge of precision. And if you accept that, then 45 ceases to be the age at which you are behind. It becomes the age at which you finally become dangerous to every falsehood that once governed your life. To understand these truths is not enough. A man may admire truth and still live in contradiction to it. So the question becomes, how shall you begin? Not with fantasy, not with dramatic vows made in one emotional hour and forgotten by the week's end. You begin with principle. The first principle is this: remove before you add. Most men who feel trapped think the answer is to add something new immediately. A new goal, a new routine, a new ambition. But the wiser question is this: what must be removed so your real life can breathe? What in your schedule is stealing strength without returning meaning? What in your environment keeps you loyal to an identity you have outgrown? What relationships depend upon your weakness, your compliance, your confusion? What habits numb your dissatisfaction just enough to keep you from changing? You must become severe in this inventory. A man cannot enter a new season while dragging the full weight of the old one behind him. Guard your time. Guard your attention. Guard your energy. These are not small matters. They are the substance of life itself. The second principle is this: stop measuring with another man's ruler. As long as you compare your private becoming to another man's visible milestones, you will remain disordered. Comparison corrupts judgment. It causes a man to pursue what is impressive instead of what is right. It tempts him to call another man's path his own simply because it appears to carry more prestige. Define victory for yourself, not sentimentally, not vaguely, with precision. What kind of work allows you to feel alive? What kind of day leaves you with dignity instead of depletion? What kind of contribution would justify the expenditure of your remaining years? What kind of life would allow you to say at last, "This is mine"? Until those questions are answered, you will remain vulnerable to counterfeit forms of success. The third principle is this: begin small, but begin truly. You do not need to destroy your life overnight in order to reclaim it. Many men delay action because they believe change must arrive in one grand, irreversible gesture. So they wait for the perfect plan, the perfect certainty, the perfect conditions. and in waiting, they remain unchanged. Begin more intelligently. Study. Ask questions. Enter the new field in humility. Speak with those who have walked the road. Test your instincts. Take one honest step your conscience can support. The point is not theatrical risk. The point is real movement. Small, true action creates momentum, and momentum restores power to a man who has felt powerless too long. The fourth principle is this: rebuild trust in yourself. Perhaps the deepest wound of feeling behind is not merely regret over the past. It is mistrust of the self. You begin to wonder whether your judgment can still be relied upon. After all, if you spent so many years in the wrong race, what faith can you place in your own decisions now? The answer is this: trust is not restored by promising yourself greatness. It is restored by keeping smaller promises faithfully. Do what you say you will do. Speak plainly. Refuse what you know is wrong for you. Take action where once you only fantasized. A man rebuilds self-trust not through inspiration, but through consistency. And when self-trust returns, courage becomes less difficult. For courage is often nothing more than the willingness to act in partnership with a self you have learned to respect again. And the final principle is this: cultivate what strengthens you. Do not make the mistake of building your second life only around correction. A man cannot live forever in reaction against what wounded him. He must also move toward what strengthens him. What interests awaken intelligence in you? What pursuits make time feel meaningful? What kind of learning revives energy rather than draining it? What kind of conversation leaves you more serious, more alive, more resolved? Seek these things, not as hobbies to fill dead hours, but as clues to the shape of your next life. A starving soul does not need distraction. It needs nourishment. And often the path forward reveals itself first, not as a master plan, but as a renewed appetite for what is true, demanding, good, and alive. This is how a new beginning is made, not in noise, not in vanity, but in disciplined removal, clear definition, small true action, restored self-trust, and the steady pursuit of what strengthens your life. The brutal truth is that at 45 you are no longer who you were at 25. And that is not a tragedy, it is an asset. You have been corrected by life, humbled by consequence, educated by disappointment, stripped of illusions that youth could not surrender without pain. The years behind you were not meaningless simply because they were imperfect. Even the wrong turns taught you something. Even the seasons of compromise revealed the cost of compromise. Even the losses clarified what cannot be trusted, what cannot be worshipped, and what can no longer be postponed. You call them wasted years because you are looking only at what they did not produce. Look again at what they made possible. They made discernment possible. They made self-respect possible. They made this awakening possible. And if you removed all that painful education, you might also remove the very clarity that now stands before you as your greatest advantage. So no, your best years are not behind you. That sentence is repeated by fearful men because it lets them quit inwardly while still appearing respectable. But a man who has suffered enough to see clearly has no right to repeat that lie. The first half of your life was not the final verdict. It was the apprenticeship, the proving ground, the research. The second half can become the season in which you stop living by borrowed definitions, the season in which you stop obeying dead ambitions, the season in which you stop asking permission to become what you were meant to be. You do not need to become younger. You need to become more exact, more honest, more deliberate, more unwilling to waste what remains. That is the real advantage of 45. Not youth, not endless time, but urgency joined to wisdom. And that combination can do extraordinary things. So when the old voice comes and says, "You are behind," answer it with truth. Say, "I am not behind, I am awake." Say, "I am not starting from nothing, I am starting from experience." Say, "I am not too late, I am finally conscious enough to build with intention." Because the man who begins at 45 with truth is often stronger than the man who began at 25 with illusion. One had time, the other has understanding. And understanding, directed by purpose, can redeem more of life than fear would ever allow you to believe. You are not finished. You are not disqualified. You are not condemned to spend the rest of your years protecting a life that no longer fits. You stand, perhaps for the first time in many years, at the edge of a life you can actually respect. That is no small thing. That is everything. You are not starting over. You are starting from experience. So I ask you now, plainly and without excuse, what is the one part of your life you already know must change? What is the one decision you have delayed because fear kept telling you that you were too late? And what happens if, instead of treating 45 as a sentence, you treat it as your starting line? Write it in the comments. State it clearly. Not because words alone will change your life, but because a man begins to change the moment he stops hiding from what he already knows. And if this message found you at the right moment, let it be more than encouragement. Let it be a decision. Let it be the line you remember as the point where you stopped drifting and began to build. There are too many men spending the strongest years they have left protecting lives that no longer fit them. Do not be one of them. The years behind you were not your burial ground. They were your preparation.